Please burn it, quickly, quickly, or crush into tinier pieces for rat darkness to sneak in and snaffle. Thank you, Janet.
Received 3449. Like to the tide, circa 3,500 words. Not answered. Left with Dennis Glover to add to collection of her work.
1954.
The Caxton Press, 1st March. Dear Miss Frame, Dennis Glover has been showing me some manuscripts of unpublished work of yours, and there is one poem among them which I should very much like to print in Landfall if I may. It is called Early Morning. In case you don't remember it now, it begins, lost in the voluminous argument of morning and magpie. I should be very glad to see any more recent work of yours too, prose and verse, if you would send it to me here. Yours sincerely, Charles Brasch.
Willow Glen, 12 March. Dear Charles Brasch, I do not remember the contents of my work at Caxton Press and am inclined to be sceptical about verse written so long ago. You say something about morning and magpie, an argument. If the verse is not too childish, you may print it. About more recent work, I am happier writing much and showing little. Later, perhaps, I may have courage to send some work. Thank you.
25th March. Dear Janet Frame, I send you the poem so that you may decide for yourself if you'd like it printed. I hope you will say yes. And do please send me some more recent work when you can.
1st April. Please do not mind if I say no now that I've seen the verse. It is too long ago, and then it would have had to have had a now attached. To make up for my saying no to printing the poem, which really isn't poetry, I shall send a bit of recent work when I can bring myself to show it to anyone. And then perhaps it will too be too long ago, and then. I shall try though. I fight off writing, but it has an overtaking habit, like sleep. Perhaps I shall send something later, when I'm discharged from hospital at the end of the year, and declared legally sane, if all is well.
3rd April. I quite understand what you feel about the poem. I might have felt the same if it had been mine. I am glad you will send me some new work. I'll look forward to seeing it later on, when you're ready.
Grand Hotel, Dunedin, 27 August. I enclose, with diffidence, a bit of writing. From An Angel at My Table. I left the story and poems at the Modern Bookshop, an envelope addressed to Charles Brasch, and I returned to the Grand Hotel to await the response. I sat in my room inventing all possible judgments, imagining Charles Brasch in his book-lined room, opening the envelope, taking out the pages, unfolding them, reading them and thinking, at last, what sensitivity, what experiences woman must have had, what tragic experiences, to write in this way. A born writer. But suppose he didn't think the work was good? What had I done?
2nd September. Dear Janet, the review is very nicely done, with just the right touch, I think. I'm very glad to have it for December's Landfall. I'm afraid I don't much like the poems, but you say you don't either. However, there will be others later, I hope. The stories seem, to me, too painful to print, and again, I'd rather wait till you have some more that you can send me. Many thanks for letting me see them. I'm very glad to have read them.
From An Angel at My Table. When I had read the note on its official Landfall paper, I began to realise how much I had invested in my Landfall contributions and their acceptance for publication. I seemed to have included my whole life and future in that envelope. I felt myself sinking into empty despair. What could I do if I couldn't write? Writing was to be my rescue. I felt as if my hands had been uncurled from their clinging place on the rim of the lifeboat. Willow Glen, 9 December. Dear Charles, thank you, but I did not want or expect payment for the review. I have been ill and have had to leave the Grand. My future address is uncertain.
1956, 9th July. It was very good to hear about the Lit Fund grant making it possible for you to go to France. I do hope you'll find what you want there. A well-wisher of yours has sent me some money, asking me to send it on to you anonymously. as a farewell gift, and I've taken the opportunity of adding something to it with my very own good wishes. Anything you'd care to send me for landfall now or later would be most welcome. If I can't use it, of course, I'll say so, as you know, but I would like to have some work of yours again. Do remember, I'd only be too glad to help in any way possible.
Takapuna. Thank you and the anonymous donor for your enclosed cheque and for your good wishes. It was very thoughtful and I appreciate it. P.S. I enclose a few verses.
20th July. I like some of the poems very much, thank you, particularly The Dead and Waiting for Daylight. Please give me an address in France so that we can send you payment for the poems. Best of wishes for the journey.
Care of Bank of New South Wales to London. My thanks for your note and your good wishes. Tomorrow I shall go to France.
7th December. This draft, Landfall's fee for your poem, is payable, as it says, in France. Frank Sargison tells me you are going on to Spain. I do hope you're enjoying it all. I'm now impatiently waiting to see your book. Best of wishes.
Ibiza, 28 December. Thank you for your note in the draft. Yes, thank you, I am enjoying it all very much. Change of sky and change of nightmare. I am very happy to be taking up my bed and walking, even though the paths lead always to the old, unalterable hometown of the soul. That is all. Yours sincerely, Janet Fran.
1963. I'm so very pleased this year's scholarship and letters has gone to you, and hope now you'll be free to do what you wish for some time. May I say that I thought Scented Gardens your best book yet. I was fascinated by the fable of Albert Dung Beetle, an unforgettable one. I hope your roof is keeping out the rain.
1964. Northcote, 2 January. Thank you for your congratulations. I'm happy to have won the scholarship and to be free, for a time, from money worries which plagued me more in New Zealand than beyond it. In New Zealand there's been only the nightmare of working in hotels for a living. For me, living away from New Zealand is a means of ensuring physical safety and security. How I wish it were not so. There is so much to be written about, with passion, if not always with love. P.S. I read the landfall review of Scented Gardens. I was interested in the remark that, of a weakness for metaphor, something must always be compared. To me, such a statement was as depressing as if someone had told me I'd better stop writing. I can understand the statement that of a weakness for weak metaphor, but isn't the need to compare, to perceive relationships, the source of all art? I'm afraid I breathe metaphors. I don't think I'm equipped to operate the verbal DDT. I can aim to be more disciplined, less indulgent with my images, but they are the basis of my life and my need to write. And they all have meaning.
February. Many thanks for your How I Began. Whatever your dissatisfaction with it, it will certainly interest other people, and possibly more important, act as a spur and encouragement to other writers, especially the young. I can understand that you want to write more from within. Nevertheless, this is very good, and I'll be lucky to get other pieces in the series which can stand beside it without looking pretty dim. I hope you're settled in a place where you can write quietly. How you must bless the doctors at the Maudsley simply for understanding your needs. How frighteningly rare such understanding is. June. The poems are delightful, and I'd like to print 3 of them. How I bleed for you over noise. If I ever get noisy neighbours, I may be forced to leave this house. The present ones are elderly. Bulldozers on Waiheke sounds like sacrilege. They're a devilish invention anyway. Frank passed on to you, no doubt, that the minister would investigate about the question of a pension. I remember lovely grassy slopes and cliffs with the Hutakawas on Waiheke from one day 3 years ago. I hope it's a good place for writing, apart from bulldozers and slaters. By the way, I fancy you mentioned the possibility of your sending me a story sometime, and I'll welcome it. September. I wrote again to the Minister of Internal Affairs about you and asked him to shake a leg, but oh, most politely.
The Robert Burns Fellowship.
Telegram. Delighted, grand news, looking forward to January. 24th December. It will be good to see you in Dunedin. The weather has been lovely. and I like the quiet when everyone goes away on holiday. Best of wishes for 1965. January. By the way, I'm shocked to see that Pegasus has been taking half your overseas earnings from Owls Do Cry and Faces in the Water. That's disgraceful robbery, and I hope you've had that contract altered. March. I've been away for a week and found your note with the letter from Boston when I got home today. I'd hate to see your papers going to America. The minister didn't exactly say no, and I'm going to tackle him again. Please don't feel despondent. I am determined. Here is Landfall's cheque for your beginnings, with my warmest thanks. Journal, 13th July. Janet shares my interest in moulding language to greater intensity and richness. Maybe we are working on parallel lines. Journal, 14th August. She is so quick, receptive, all her antennae alive, aware. 23rd November. Dear Janet, congratulations on being a householder. Does it make you swell with importance? I think it did something of the sort to me, but perhaps it was rather to pin down my guilt. I hope you'll enjoy yours, house, not guilt, and be happy in it. May I come to see it one day? Meanwhile, I'll try to look in at the department one afternoon. Au revoir.
1966.
Dunedin, 11th February. I had hoped to see you as soon as you returned from Auckland and blame myself for my laissez-faire habits. Now in a few days I am off to Auckland. I had hoped to see your house, and also I wanted to bring you something for it, a small rug which can be used either on the floor or in the winter on your bed, warm but not too heavy. It is made by a Dutch friend of mine in Hamilton. Rather than let it wait here, I shall give it to Ruth, either to put in your house or to give you when you get home. It comes with my good wishes, hoping you'll be very happy in the house. I wonder if you would think of sending me another story. I should love to have one by you in my final year. Ruth and I went to Broad Bay this morning, scythed grass, mowed, and generally made the cottage get atable again. It looked quite abandoned. Then we swam, coldish but refreshing, and marvellous hot sun afterwards. 23rd February. I hope you're home and settled again and found the house in good order. Christchurch is strangely fog-bound, damp, very close, everything muffled, gutters running, pipes gurgling. I droop over proofs in the heavy air. Yes, Hocken would be a very suitable place for E.P. Dawson to deposit Frank's letters. She can make any conditions she wishes about access to them. I would suggest that she says no one at all is to be allowed to read them while she and Frank remain alive, and perhaps for a number of years after. I am appalled at the way people fall like wolves on the letters of writers who are still alive or barely in their graves. It's a kind of cannibalism. It's certainly very indecent. I wish one could put a curse on eyes that pry too soon. I go to Auckland on Saturday and home next week. 28th April. So the English Sundays have taken to printing stories. I'm so pleased the Sunday Telegraph wants the bath. Of course, no objection at all. I'd like them to make the usual acknowledgement to landfall, but you can only ask. They'll please their lordly selves. The fee ought to be fatter though. £40 is modest for a Pluty paper, not to say mean. Would you come here one day while Carl Stead is with me, or is there a cool breath between you? Tell me tomorrow night if you come to the performance. Yes, you're coming with Ruth, I remember. Auckland, 17th September. A State of Siege is above all a poem. Much veined, richly coloured stone that one wants to turn over and over in one's hand. A crystal that seems to contain all worlds. I love the evocation of Mulfred's particular worlds. That of the Waitaki country, that of the island, beautiful. They reverberate in one's mind. The shape of the book is very sure and satisfying, a hold-all that is yet firm and shapely, without bulging and sprawling. And that must have been hard to manage. Thank you for giving me this copy, and for the book itself. Frank seems well, even buoyant in spite of trouble. 16th November. I've been wondering whether to try to go to London via America next year, but I might not be allowed in, having written enough against the war in Vietnam. And anyway, I feel in two minds about it. I'll ring you when I get back from Wellington. I'd like to come up for afternoon tea one day and take a mint plant. I've been enjoying your mint leaves. Thank you. 25th November. With my warmest thanks for this and the other work you have allowed me to print in Landfall. It's been wonderful to have it. Haven't forgotten about tea and mint. Hoping to see you soon. Journal, 2nd December 1966. Jim, Jackie and Janet. to dinner talk mostly about meditation?
1967. Baltimore, USA, April. There are often shooting incidents, woundings and killings in our neighbourhood. Dunedin seems so far away and peaceful.
21st April. So good to hear from you. I set off today week. My sole address is care of Brompton Square, London. Baltimore sounds alarming. Do you think the war in Vietnam seems less terrible to Americans because they are so used to violence at home? I hope you'll be home by the time I get home, or soon after. Happy journeys.
New York, 1st July. I hope you had a very enjoyable trip to the continent. People I met at Yeddo have lent me their apartment in New York. I'm looking forward to seeing the galleries again. I've had the most wonderful experience of seeing paintings that were known before only in dull postcard colours. The reality is far more than the dream. Perhaps I may see you in London.
Scotland, 16th August. Today your card came telling me you'll be in London from 28 to 31 August. I am now in Scotland. I'll be back in London on 31 August, probably in the middle of the morning. I'd love to see you, but we may not overlap. Yeddo sounds very pleasant, and I don't wonder you're going back there, but I hope you'll be home for Christmas as you expected. London has been both exciting and depressing. I've swum in the exotic waves of people and traffic with exhilaration, but sometimes sinking, overwhelmed. Whether I want to go home or not, I can't be sure. Best wishes and au revoir, Charles.
1968.
Harriet Row, 13th October. I was talking about your work and Ruth's to a parent-teacher association in Dalclutha last week. They seemed to enjoy the passages I read them, so I hope I may have won you a few more readers, especially young ones. I reread a good deal of your work for the session, and was particularly struck once again by Uncle Black Beetle's story about Albert Dung Beetle in Scented Gardens. Although it has its proper place in that book, it also stands out independently. It's most powerful and moving and very beautifully written. The recital of words from the alphabet, the dictionary, is haunting poetry.
Opaho, 17 October. You say nice things about Scented Garden and the Beetle. I'm having a book about an ant published next year. If you can come up one afternoon next week for a cup of tea, you can ring me. I will give you your book, The Hard Hours by Anthony Hecht.
23rd November. I have been living with the Rainbirds for several days now while reading it slowly. It's a haunting and troubling book. I fear it is only too true of Dunedin, and no doubt of other such small towns. I've heard those stories on my own roof and in imagination. Any one of us might well find himself a Godfrey to his fellow citizens for no better reason than in Godfrey's case, and how right you are about our evasiveness towards death and our attempts to keep it out of sight and thought and talk. I enjoyed the pictures of Dunedin skies and weather, and so much of the detail, descriptive and ironical and imaginative. It's a book to think about and return to and not forget. I wrote off to Wellington after seeing you for news of the pension, but no word yet. I'll ring you soon.
1969.
9th May. How are you finding Yeddo this year? It's a pity you are missing the Francis Hodgkins exhibition, which has a lot of lovely work in it. And the capping procession today was all good, risque fun. You probably know that Ralph Hottery is Francis Hodgkins Fellow this year, and Michael Smither is going to be in and out of Dunedin. A very likeable, fresh, direct character. The town seemed to hum with painters for a few days.
Yeddo, New York State, 17 May. I was so pleased to get your letter. Blanche Dombeck, Alan Lalchuk, Philip Roth and I had our quarters upstairs in West House, and of course during the long winter we came to know one another very well, and worked hard and played hard. Hyde Solomon, a planter from New York, is going to paint my portrait beginning today. Thank you again for the Dunedin news, Charles. Norwich, 17 July. I have some decisions to make, and one, whether I feel too scared to return to New Zealand, will be influenced by the outcome of the scheme you've taken time and trouble to think of. England is pleasantly sleepy after the US. The policemen here carry gloves instead of guns. In Dunedin soon, the hills will be shadowed gold with the budding broom and gorse. It rains now, I suppose, and you light fires.
25th July. I've had several chances this year to air in public the proposal that New Zealand should set up the equivalent of the British Civil List. But this is too far off and indefinite to help you now. I've been talking about your position quite privately to various people who value your work, and after much discussion we have a scheme. We should like to offer to guarantee you an income of up to $600 a year until a government scheme comes in and you receive a pension under that. I hope you'll be willing to accept this in a quite impersonal way. It would have to be an entirely confidential arrangement between us to go no further. Yaddo sounds like a fairy tale. I might believe it if I saw your portrait. Have you a photo of the portrait that you could send me? Hone Tūwhare came to Dunedin last month as a second Burns Fellow for the rest of this year. He, Warren Dibble and Ralph Hotary compose a sort of humming top which now seems the centre of the town's life.
London, 9 August. Thank you for answering my letter so quickly. I was rather overwhelmed by the idea of a monthly deposit until some other arrangement can be made. I'll feel guilty from time to time. I won't be able to help it, but the secrecy of the arrangement will help. If I accept the arrangement of a monthly payment, until hopefully a civil list pension may come my way, then I'd like to make some arrangement to pay it into a pool when I get in advance. A pool would help with emergency lump sums to other writers. I do believe, and I hope I carry out this belief with a civilised constructive act should never finish, that if one is done to me, I must continue it by trying to help someone else. Whether this is an attempt to be unselfish or to salve my conscience, I don't know. I find now that I'm looking forward to coming back home to work. I hope so. I know so little about New Zealand. I've never even been to Queenstown. Yaddo was like a fairy tale. I enjoyed the people I met and I worked hard, though I'm not sure of the literary merit of the work I've done. Everybody works very hard here. 7 long days a week. The idea of all artists being together and working each in a small studio is rather frighteningly reminiscent of a farm of broiler hens or maybe beef calves. The portrait of me is very stodgy looking me.
26 August. Your letter of 9th August has lain for a good week unanswered. I'm sorry, but I've been completely taken up looking after an elderly cousin from London who was here for the celebrations and is determinedly social. We are all glad indeed that you say yes, and it's grand to know that you will be here again by the end of the year. The portrait is so sad, so heavy, so little like you. What a pity. May someone else do a much better one. The celebrations, then the University Arts Festival, brought a crowd of people. Plays, music, art show, folk singing, hops, parties, review. I've never known such a time in Dunedin. Hone Tūwhare and Ralph Hotary were in the thick of things. I took part in the 2 late night poetry readings and was at a party at Hone's until nearly 3 one morning, but decidedly groggy the next day. I'm no night bird. Best wishes for your work in London and New Hampshire and for your return home. It will be good to see you.
Baltimore, 17 November. My time at McDowell has been memorable chiefly for the richness of the music I've had here. One of the painters was also a gifted pianist and played each evening from the vast store of music in the library. Some evidence of his musical interests and gifts may have been had from knowing that he was many years younger than Stravinsky. They had been close friends for many years. Sometimes, when I was the only listener, I felt I was receiving private lessons in musical appreciation as he played the piece on the piano, returning to particularly strange or beautiful phrases, discussing them, replaying the notes. I never dreamed I would have the good fortune to have so much live music. I agree with you about Hyde Solomon's portrait of me. It is sad and heavy. I hate it. Do you know May Sarton's poems? She read one at an anti-war gathering I went to last month. I stay here and feed a pet chickadee and admire the birch trees that know how to wear gracefully every kind of weather, even the kind that bends but does not break their backs.
December. McDowell sounds as good as Yaddo, and with that music as well. My head is full of the Deer Valley variations nearly a week after hearing it played here, and then coming home to play the record over. I know the work well, but had not listened to it for a long time. I wish you could have a pianist to play it and talk about it, as you've had. That's enviable. May Sarton, I know the name, but not the poems. It will be good to see you back.
1970, 5 February, to Bill Brown. The chief problem will be where to get my necessary supply of laughter. Dunedin is a prim place, and my friends there are on the sedate side. I even made a joke with him. Most people were naturally frightened of him. I remember very vividly when I was a waitress at the Grand Hotel, accepting an invitation to afternoon tea. This would be 15 years ago. It was a dull day and I had no coat to wear, and one of the waitresses, when she knew I was going to a grand place on the hill, said, "Perhaps he will give you a coat." I arrived in fear and trembling and was greeted by a beautiful white cat. We had slices of seed cake. I don't mean that the beautiful white cat and I had slices of seed cake. When I was leaving and Charles saw it was raining, he said innocently, "Would you like a coat? I can give you a coat." At that time of his life, he was not known to laugh. During my year as Burns Fellow, he welcomed me to the city by taking me to concerts and plays until Dunedin hostesses began, embarrassingly, to me and no doubt to him, to include us as partners in small select dinners. I would arrive to find him as the only other guest. About once in 6 or 7 weeks, Charles invites me to dinner, and after a suitable interval, I invite him to my place and cook a meal or make tea with my specialties of cookies and hot date scones and freshly baked bread. 13 May to Bill Brown. I spent last evening at Charles Brasch's place. Charles invited Ruth and me to meet some scholar from Canada who is here studying Commonwealth literature. An Icelandic scholar, I mean a student of Icelandic, on the eve of his departure for Scandinavia, was also there, and we sat around the electric fire and made polite remarks, and though they didn't ask me how long and why the United States was, they expected me to speak very wisely about, quote, life in the United States, unquote. It was quite pleasant, but it began to grow boring. The Canadian scholar was a golden-curled, clean-limbed, handsome lad with a flashing smile. I preferred the Icelandic scholar, who was rather sullen and silent. His name was Bill Manhire. Ruth was witty and persistent, Charles was suave and in good humour, and I was dreadfully silent. Couldn't manage a sentence without faltering, though Ruth kindly said afterwards that though I didn't say anything, I gave the impression that if I wanted to, I could have spoken volume. Late May to Bill. Yesterday afternoon I went to visit Charles Brasch for a cup of tea and seed cake. He's looking frail, and his hair is very white and shaggy. He'd just come in from his Russian lecture and says he's been reading Turgenev and Dostoevsky in Russian and has discovered how much has been lost in the translation. He gave me a copy of his new book of poems and one copy of a small book of poems he had printed for his aunt's 80th birthday. What a marvellous tribute for someone's birthday.
Sunday, 7th June. Scenes from Midnight Cowboy keep coming back to me, usually reminding me of their truthfulness or humour. It's a change to feel no regret about having seen a film.
Monday, 8 June. I keep thinking about the film too. Thank you for your poems, which I found moving and exciting. Home ground is like a piece of music. August to Bill Brown. Yes, Charles Brasch is a nice, gentlemanly type. I said to Jackie Baxter that I thought New Zealand would go to rack and ruin when Charles died. She was thinking the same thing. He has held the arts on his shoulders for so long. Little Antipodean Atlas. He was unpaid editor of Landfall for 20 years. Perhaps something of his rather Spartan nature is shown in a letter from him to a New Zealand scholar who had been away in Oxford and was returning to New Zealand. This letter is quoted in a book about the scholar Don Anderson. Charles wrote, as quoted,
My warmest congratulations on your coming marriage. And yes, I can congratulate you on coming home too. You have to be prepared to make your own life here. Nothing is made and ready as in England. You need to be self-dependent. But that granted, life can be quite rich. I suppose you will get the shock nearly everyone does when you first land and look about you. But go into mental training.
Go into mental training. That strikes a chill to my heart. But it is pure Charles Brasch, a noble, upright old man with discipline instead of marrow in his bones. August, to Bill. My flu's gone now. It was a nasty flu. Charles Brasch phoned the other day and asked if he could call in on his way to visit a friend. He came for 15 minutes, stayed I mean, and brought a big bag of grapefruit, lemons and a lovely kind of honey that I haven't seen since I was a kid, and my father used to get it wholesale in 40-pound tins. He was looking very fit and had been mountain climbing with a friend. He said he had been to 5 funerals in the last 3 weeks, including that of an aunt who was 96.
16th August. Intensive Care seems to me probably the most powerful of all your books, and an incisive satire on New Zealand, a warning one would like to think would be taken to heart.
September, to Bill. I went to Charles Brasch's place for dinner. The Burns fellow Ted Middleton was also there, and we had a pleasant dinner swallowed with and followed by a diluted conversation about publishers here and elsewhere. Charles is reading Mailer's Armies of the Night to Ted, who is almost blind. If one does not want to join in the conversation at Charles's place, one can always gaze at the paintings on the wall. His collection is usually on loan somewhere, but last night he had a lovely painting by Frances Hodgkins, whom I think he said you didn't know. She's our painting equivalent of Catherine Mansfield, and her life followed something of Mansfield's pattern, most of it spent away from New Zealand. She lived to a great age though, unlike KM, and changed and developed her style in later years. 9 December, to Bill. The flight from Dunedin was pleasant. I found Charles Brasch was on the plane, and we sat together. I think the first time in my life that I've had company on a flight. I warned him that I would be likely to grab his arm if we were being buffeted, and he, who I'm sure has remained ungrabbed all his life, suppressed a slight alarm and gallantly said he did not mind. The flight was calm though, and we were chased by a wind.
1971.
January. The plane trip from Dunedin to Wellington is far away now. I enjoyed your company so much.
February. I loved having your company to Wellington and hope you may have found someone agreeable to cross the Pacific with. I hope you're having a happy time in California.
Santa Barbara, California, February. My days are filled with music here.
8th November. This time, at long last, some real news. I heard today that the government has agreed to grant you an annuity of $1,000 starting in 1972. I hope this will let you keep the roof in good repair, as well as eat and be warm. Thanks to John Money for his promise to photograph the Rita Angus paintings. If he sends me prints, I'll pass them on to the Hocken. I'm very pleased you like my poems. It's manner that you say so.
It's wonderful what you have done for me, Charles, and I hope it will help others too. I'm grateful and happy. It has been a week of good news, for a few days ago I finished my new novel.
18th November. Dear Janet, I was dismayed to hear from Frank that you've been so hard up and wish I'd known before, because I've got a small fund of dollars doing nothing in New York. My father left it, and I use it to buy a wedding present once in a blue moon or pay for a magazine. It should be used before it becomes worthless, and here's a bite of it which I'd be thankful if you make use of. Dunedin is suddenly very lively. The baritone Brian Drake sang the Dichterliebe last night very well. I'm going to see the film of The Virgin and the Gypsy tomorrow, said to be excellent, and next week to Britain's Albert Herring, conducted by Peter Platt. Otherwise, rain and rain.
Yaddo, 3 December. The truth is there must have been a misunderstanding. I never wrote to Frank to tell him I was hard up, and he must have misconstrued something in my letters. I think I have found out what it was. When I came here to Yaddo, I wrote, I think, that I now bought no food, that I did not even buy soap. I never dreamed this would seem to be dire poverty. These are just the economic facts of Yaddo, where almost everything is supplied.
1972.
March, to Bill. Charles came up for afternoon tea the other afternoon. I baked gingerbread and date squares for him.
Postcard from the Netherlands, July. Dear Janet, in this house they used to weigh people to find out whether they were witches. If you failed to move the scales, you must be a witch. I was weighed and proved not to be one. I was given a certificate to show it. Much relief. The Dutch stopped burning witches far earlier than the English. One feels grateful for their cool scepticism.
Shakespeare Bay, Whangaparaoa, 14 August. Welcome home after your journey. You'll see I have shifted house and said goodbye or au revoir to Dunedin. I couldn't come across a quiet house at a quiet price, although I looked on the peninsula and had dreams of living among the albatrosses.
31st August. Dear Janet, did you find it easy to take up your bed and walk? And do you feel well rested now? I stayed at Sandmore Bay just after the war, when we had the beach to ourselves and swam naked. Rex Fairbairn visited us on his motorbike. Looking north towards the little islands in the Gulf, I thought it was a classical scene, so calm in its glowing blue and white and blessed emptiness, but I don't suppose you have it to yourself now. There were 2 Americans at Rotterdam, Kenneth Koch, who teaches children to write poetry in what sounds a sensible and pleasant way. He works in New York. He read a long and tedious poem of his own called Sleeping with Women, which told me nothing about the experience, but was merely an interminable shopping list like Don Giovanni's. A most likeable man, though. Do you know him? And a young pop singer called Tucker Zimmerman. He rather fell on my neck when I spoke to him afterwards, and he and his wife and I became, well, buddies. If I visit Auckland, I'd love to see you.
Whangaparaoa, 30 September. I don't know the poet you mentioned. I see he has a couple of poems in The Voice That Is Within Us, American Poetry of the 20th Century, edited by Hayden Carew. I have an unwieldy proof copy. It includes almost everybody, with a note about each and 2 or 3 poems as a starting point. It's a good idea as long as one goes beyond the starting point. Otherwise, I feel such anthologies are useless, almost. I love it here. It is quiet and the sea is close. I saw Frank one weekend. He was tired and I was tired, and I think he had the impression I was worried or something. I couldn't convince him otherwise.
From the epilogue to Daughter Buffalo.
Most of the patients here are not patients as such, although all are aged and most are referred to as being ambulant. And one I notice in support or advertisement of this fact carries a fine book of poems by one of our poets entitled Ambulando.
1973, Dunedin, 3rd January. Dear Janet, perhaps you are a good mother fond of all your children, but Daughter Buffalo is one I like particularly. It seems to me among your best books. A very beautiful and persuasive fable. Why is that line about the 5th month grass so haunting? It's one I never forget. And what is 5th month grass? Simply the grass that springs up in presumably May, or a special kind? It gave me a very strange sensation to find Ambulando brought into the fable. Not only a shock of pleasure, but a sense that I must be leading more lives than I know, which in one way would be no surprise, only one is so rarely brought to realize it. Thank you. You are very generous to send me a copy of the book. I wish there was some new work of mine I could send you. I hope Shakespeare Bay continues peaceful. A very happy New Year.
Whangaparoa, 24 January. New Year greetings, and thank you for Ted Middleton's book, which is beautifully made in every way. Whangaparoa, 30 March. Frank tells me you have not been well. This is just a good wish note to you. Please get better soon. At last the quiet peace of Auckland. At last the quiet peace of autumn, the holiday people gone, and baby seagulls, like all modern generations, much bigger than their parents, and swamp hens and a few blue herons down on the beach. It is very early morning. The tide is out. The dark has not quite gone. I hope you are better, Charles. Whangaparoa, 2 April, to Bill Brown. Dear Bill, when I was in to visit Frank last week, I had bad news about Charles Brasch. Frank says it's the usual grim illness. I wept for Charles. He's always been such a private person, and it was Ruth, in whom he confides, who taught me to keep secrets by example, for she kept his and hers. Perhaps there is a time in life when one has to live publicly, as in a hospital. If he has pain, that is perhaps the least of matters, for poets and painters and composers feed upon pain.
From Last Poems, with you, to Janet Frame. Can you hear me, Whangaparoa? Listen to your seas, listen to your tides, to the moon pulling the deep. I am there, under the waters, in the winds, in the leaf that sighs. I am there, sleeping in the rocks, under the houses, below the promontories. I am the sea, I am the wind, everything and nothing with you.
24th May, to Bill. I'm mourning for Charles Brasch, not for his death, which was merciful in the circumstances, but for our loss. In the last letter I had from him, he had read my book, Buffalo, and was writing to thank me, as he always wrote after he had read anyone's books. He once told me he made it a rule of his life that if he admired any writing, he made sure he told the author of his admiration. It was such a little thing to do, he said, and it was so often overlooked, because one might feel admiration and never communicate it. I always remember this, and I'd like to carry out this rule. In the last letter Charles wrote me, he talked of the 5th month and the quote from Whitman. He wrote the letter in January of this year, just before he came ill. And he said he wondered why the 5th month, May, was always so special to him. Well, he died in May. I mentioned him and his poems at the end of Daughter Buffalo, and nobody else seems to have noticed it, because maybe they didn't read that far. But conscientious Charles always read to the end. He said it gave him a strange feeling to be included in the book. I am doing what those who are left always do, search for links and clues. He was a wonderful man, unique in this country in his regard for the arts. 1974, to Bill. I do find it so strange in New Zealand with Charles Brasch gone, as if a familiar city had disappeared. Yet I should comfort myself by remembering he's still here, as he is, when one takes his poems to read. Good old immortal artists. Thank you.